Today's guest is an expert in one of the most critical leadership skills of all, clear, compelling communication. Joel Schwartzberg is the principal of joelschwartzberg.net, which helps teams identify, sharpen, and champion their most important points. He's a communication coach, public speaking expert, and the author of Get to the Point, Sharpen Your Message, and Make Your Words Matter. He helps teams, leaders, and organizations transform their ideas into impactful messages that inspire action and drive results. From 2013 to 2024, Joel served as Senior Director of Executive and Strategic Communications for a major national nonprofit. Earlier in his career, he held senior communications roles with Nickelodeon, PBS, and Time Inc. I saw that on your LinkedIn. There's just great stories about all that stuff. So, a former collegiate, state, and national champion public speaker and award-winning speechwriter, Joel has spent decades teaching presentation skills and messaging skills to executives at organizations like American Express, BlueCross BlueShield, the Brennan Center for Justice, Sandia National Labs, and State Farm Insurance. His work has appeared in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Newsweek, and Inc., where he's become known for his no-nonsense approach to communication. Stop meandering, start making meaning. In a world overloaded with noise, Joel's message is simple and powerful. It's not about talking more, it's about saying what truly matters. Joel, it's an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you, Clint. I'm very pleased and happy to be with you and your listeners.
I'm very happy to have you. So I was chatting with you offline, but basically we're going to talk today about Get to the Point, which I love. Just read that one. And then another one I will talk about maybe later, but language of leadership. So that's also on my to-do list. But all right, we'll jump right into it. I like to think of all the people that come on the show as superheroes, and all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours? What got you to where you are today?
Yeah, my origin story, the challenge of that is sort of capsulizing it. But
you weren't bitten by a spider, a radioactive spider or anything.
Yes, something like that. But if I wrote a book called Get to the Point, then I should be able to do just that. So let me break it up into some of my aha moments. I started doing competitive public speaking when I was in 6th grade, and I continued with it. It's an activity called forensics through high school and through senior year of college. I was a national champion at the end of college, and then I thought I was done. I was like that basketball player who's like, all right, well, I got to get a job now. But the thing is that when I interviewed for jobs, when I spoke at conferences, when I talked to my direct report or to my bosses, I was using all the things I learned as a public speaking competitor. So the first aha moment was I can actually share these skills with people in the business community where it honestly really counts, where you're not getting trophies, but it plays a role in your success. So I worked with a company called Media Bistro to do quote unquote public speaking consulting. The standard stuff that frankly, you can go to AI or Google now to get all the tips you need. But a funny thing happened about 3 years into it. I didn't get bitten by a radioactive spider, but I asked some of my clients, hey, just so we're on the same page, what is your point? What's your big takeaway? And Clint, the things they replied back to me were not points. Either they wouldn't have one, or they confused a point with a theme or a topic or a catchphrase or a definition or an observation or a notion. Things that you can argue that you could only just sort of put out there and maybe attach a couple of adjectives to. So it got me thinking, and I spent a lot of time trying to understand what is a point. I mean, we're familiar with that word. You've heard get to the point, and this speaker never got to the point. And, what's your point? But I don't think we've ever sort of unburied it and unpacked it. So I wrote the book, Get to the Point, to capsulize that. And I really transformed all of my training to that, because if you don't have a point, not just in your speeches, but in your emails and your articles and your blogs and your posts and your Slack conversations, then you are rendered pointless. So between the book and my job as a speechwriter at that time, sort of late in my career, I learned so much that I really wanted to devote it all into private practice and private clients. So I created joelschwartzberg.net. And now I deal with everybody from scientists to salespeople to CEOs to interns, and everything from cybersecurity to nonprofit advocacy, because what I'm training is so foundational. And I just love teaching it, but I also enjoy learning more about it. And the more I learn, the more I can teach.
So we open this podcast every week with the George Bernard Shaw quote that says the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And I would say, having read the book, you seem to agree with that statement. In fact, you even quote a 2023 study that found poor workplace communication costs U.S. businesses $1.2 trillion with a T annually.
Yeah, absolutely. And the evidence is in everyone's anecdotes. I mean, I would ask everyone who's listening right now, have you ever seen someone ramble? Have you ever gotten an email that you had to untangle to understand the point of it? Have you ever had a workplace communication that went down a rabbit hole or just got so general in a meeting that you never really got to the important things in the meeting agenda because people just sort of took their time in trying to identify their own point, trying to make a point, trying to argue a point, interrupting each other? We've all been in this situation. So those statistics are one way to prove it, but it's inarguable that people are having trouble getting to the point. And I just enjoy helping them untangle that, not just with theory and not just throwing Simon Sinek at them saying, start with why, but how to express that why. Tools and exercises and workshops that really tell people if what you have is a point or not and how to sharpen that point so it has impact.
So it's funny, when I was reading the book, I was reminded of the game we all play as kids called Telephone, where, which is a slightly different point that you're trying to make here, but it's basically the fun of the game is, of course, if you've never played it, is that the first kid has a secret, whispers to the next kid, who whispers to the third kid on down the line. And what makes the game so much fun is that in the end, what the last kid thinks the secret is not remotely close to what the first kid actually said. And what's not fun is that same thing happens in the business world today. Yeah. Where as a leader, I think I have a very clear message or a point that I'm trying to get across, and then I'm befuddled when people don't do what I clearly stated. And my contention is that if you had a conversation instead where you actually ask clarifying questions, then you would actually get a message that doesn't get mangled as you go through the organization. And the example I like to use is, if you and I are driving somewhere and Joel, you say, Clint, take a left, and you think that's crystal clear. It's not right. It's not straight. It's not turn around. It's to make a left. That's clear. But then I'm going to say, okay, Joel, do you mean to make a left at McDonald's, the stop sign, or the major intersection with the stoplight? So by asking clarifying questions, I'll truly understand what your left really means. And to me, that's getting to the point is being able to say clearly what you want and not meandering all around.
Right. And critically, understanding it from your audience's perspective, not just from your perspective. When I work with CEOs, often they start with the wrong question, but it seems right. And that is, what do I want to say today? That's the wrong question, especially internally. The right question is, what does my audience want and need to hear? And I just posted something on LinkedIn about this, because if you're not connecting with what they want and need to hear and understanding what they already know and need to supplement that, then you will be out of touch no matter how much you perfected your point. So it's a crucial part of that process. But you're right. Often speakers and communicators, they see it like a Christmas tree. And the more ornaments and details I add to it, the bigger it'll glow. I'm just giving you more and more and more and more ideas to understand the value of what I'm saying. What they don't understand is that when people receive multiple pieces of information, those pieces fight each other for your attention. And in that fight, the impact of each is diluted. I often say it like this, and I like these sort of fortune cookie sayings as long as they're substantial. If I tell you, Clint, a lot of things, you might remember none of them. If I tell you some things, you might remember some of them. If I tell you one thing, you will remember all of them. Yeah. So it's one idea, or at least one idea at a time.
No, I love that. In fact, I was emblazoned in my mind when I read that. I love that so much. Because it's kind of like the one where in my world where you do project work, we want one owner for every activity, because the old saying is anybody could have done it. Somebody should have done it. Nobody did it. And now everybody pays the price, right? I mean, so it's
right, everybody pays the price.
So I get it. And you were just talking about, you opened the book with the idea most people don't have a point. And so maybe we can start by because you have some great exercises in the book about fill in the blank and all that stuff. Maybe just educate the listeners on when somebody thinks they have a point, but it actually isn't a point. What makes a point a point?
Right. Well, in a broad sense, a point is not just an idea being shared. It is a proposition, a recommendation, a suggestion, an assertion. And we've come across these things before under different names. In colleges, we called it a thesis. In PR, we call it a key message. In executive communication, sometimes we call it an elevator pitch. But it's basically the boiled down argument, not like a Thanksgiving over the table argument, but what in debate we used to call an argument, a proposition, an assertion, not just a sharing of ideas. But I do want to share some of these exercises, and I'll preface it by saying I also teach this stuff to third graders through seventh graders in my community. And yes, I did say third graders. And so the things I'm about to share, I also share with them. So it just shows how basic they are. And the most important one is called the I believe that test. Basically, you take what you think is your point or your elevator pitch, your one sentence idea, you put the words I believe that in front of it, and you ask yourself one question. Is it now a complete sentence? Would it get a check plus from my fourth grade language arts teacher as a complete sentence, not a run on, and certainly not a fragment? So let's take an example. Let's say podcasting. Is this a complete sentence? I believe that podcasting. No. But we hear people saying, what are you going to talk about today? I'm going to talk about podcasting. What about I believe that the value of podcasting? Nope. I believe that the importance or the future of podcasting. Nope. These aren't complete sentences. It forces you to say something like, I believe that podcasting will be the most effective way to attract our millennial audience. Now you have a complete sentence and it makes you go on, because you're sort of interested. I'm interested in capturing a millennial audience. We haven't done such a good job with them. But how do I do it? I see. I do it with the podcast. And that gets into the other test, which I call the XY test. A solid point will have an X, a means of attaining the impact, and a Y, the impact. Let's go back to the podcasting point. I believe that podcasting, the X, will lead to Y, attracting a millennial audience. But sometimes we only say the X. I believe we should have a podcast. All right, says the other person, but why? To what end? Or some only have the Y and not the X. I believe we really need to target this millennial audience. To which the other person says, yeah, I agree, but how? The podcast. So you need both. What I'm proposing will be the turnkey to that solution, and I need to articulate the highest value solution. You wouldn't believe, Clint, how many nonprofits that are in the business of saving lives that are making points that don't end with, this will save lives. They end with, well, this will bring traffic to our website. This will enable us to build more facilities. This will bring more revenue in the fourth quarter. This will get more people writing checks. And I'm like, hey, you're in the business of saving lives. That's what people love about you. Play that ace card because you can. Now, for some, it's about selling more Coca-Cola. But if you're in the business of selling lives, go ahead and say that.
That's great. When I read this, it was also it resonated with me because in, again, the world that I live in, which is project management work, we have a charter document and you're defining what your scope is and why you're doing it, which we call the objectives, which very much matches up with your X and Y because scope is what you do to achieve the objective, which is why you're doing it in the first place. And I like to tell people we get to play the Y game now that we played as kids. So when somebody says, for the example I like to use is, hey, the project is we're going to renovate an existing facility and we're going to shut down 3 satellite facilities and move everybody to the same place. And so you say, well, what's the objective? Well, the objective is to renovate a facility. No. Why are you renovating that facility?
Right.
Well, because we're at 3 places, we want to go down to 1 place. But why do you want to go down to 1 place? We want to reduce transportation costs by 30%. So now you've got to the why. So totally, it was like you're speaking my language when you said that.
Yeah. And sometimes the why is different based on the audience. If it's internal or external, you're talking to people involved, stakeholders versus a public audience. But just ask yourself, like you said, and I've taken some PMI training, very, very useful, especially in terms of identifying stakeholders, but that's another conversation. But yeah, just ask yourself, to this audience, what thing do they prize most? And how can I explain to them or propose to them the means to get to that kind of impact?
Another thing you said that I thought was interesting was you say we often fall victim to sharing instead of selling our point. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. I pose this question to you and your audience. How many times do you see this presentation? All right, let's talk about this idea. So first, we're going to discuss the history of the idea. Then we'll talk about how we came up with this idea. We're going to talk about the people who I've invited to brainstorm on this idea. We're going to talk about the amount of money we're going to invest in the idea. And we're going to talk about the 3-year milestones we need to take to effect the idea. Thank you very much. And you know what I never said, although we've seen that presentation before, I never said why we're taking on this idea. So I've shared the details. I've shared the inventory, the table of contents, if you will, but I did not explain why, like you said, Clint, in the PMI training, why we're doing this. What is the value to this audience? And I'll give you a specific example I love to share. I had a client who created collateral materials, promotional materials, hats and brochures and calendars. And I said, all right, I'm a potential client. Give me your best pitch. And she says, great. Okay, you see this hat? This hat, an elephant could step on this hat and it'll never crush. And you can have your logo on the outside and on the inside. And you see this brochure, there's a special laminate on the brochure where it'll never crunch and it'll never shrink. And you can have both sides of it. And you see this pin, this is a special pin that's a magnet. It's not going to draw any blood. And I'll tell you what, if you order 100 of these pins, I'll give you another 50 at a discounted price. She was all done. And I said, you're done? She said, I'm done. I've described everything well. And I said, you did describe your inventory well. But you know what I never heard? I never heard you say, if you buy my products, you will be more successful. And that was her point. But she never said it because she was too busy describing her inventory instead of selling her point. And one last metaphor that I think is terrific. Think of a book. Think of 2 elements of a book. You have a table of contents and you have a blurb in the back. Both are designed to give a reader insight into the book, but only one sells the book and the other describes the book. The table of contents does not sell the book. Only the blurbs do. So if you want to really sell your point, you want to be the blurber. You don't want to be the person selling or describing and sharing the table of contents.
Oh, totally. Because you always look at the back of the book and say, well, who said what about this book? Because that's that's going to get me to buy it. Mm-hmm. The content seems interesting, but nobody's had anything good to say about it that I don't know if I'm going to pick it up.
Yeah. And I often say information doesn't sell, but we often think it does, especially if you're like a professor or you're on the research end of it. I'm sharing data. The data doesn't sell itself. You have to transform it into a proving, proposal-making vehicle to truly make it sell. So what you said in the beginning, do not share content, sell the point.
And you mentioned tension magnets and how we share, why we should use them. What about those?
Yeah, there are a few I like to call them magic words that we use to tell people what to do. Some of the magic words are suggest, recommend, besides being share. I want to prove something, not just share it. One of the phrases that I see all the time is people say, I want to allow something to happen. This idea will allow this impact. But allowing means I'm just going to step aside and allow it to happen. The word you want to use is enable, because you are the agent of enablement. You made it happen. So let's use enable versus allow. For the same reason, we want to use prevent versus avoid. You see, you're in the act of preventing. Avoiding is in the act of not really acting. The same thing, you ever hear someone say, we're going to address this issue. What does that mean? Well, we're going to think about it. Maybe I'll create a blue ribbon panel to discuss it. No, we're going to act on that issue. We're going to overcome a challenge, not just face it. And we're going to respond to a situation, not react to it. That's a big one. And if I could put some mustard on that, when we react to something, that's an emotional reaction. That made me angry. That made me sad. That made me frustrated. That is not a proactive sort of business move. Responding is a thoughtful way of thinking about an input and responding with a solution, not just reacting with an emotion.
And I may be conflating these, but I think there was also some points you made about, so here's the point, or these big grandiose things. And I think you gave some examples of, I believe she's your favorite speaker, which is Michelle Obama.
Right.
And you talk about how she, in 3 or 4 different examples of how she keeps bringing things back to make sure that her point is understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And, nobody ever comes away from a presentation thinking like, well, Sally, she was great, but she made her point too many times. Nobody says that because the point is the gift. Now, you don't want to say it the same way over and over, but lead with it, illustrate it with a story. And we all know about storytelling. We should talk about strategic storytelling, but end with it because there's this idea that's been proven by research that people remember what you start with, and what you end with. But there are lots of ways to phrase it. You could show it in data. You could show it in a video. You could illustrate it in a story. You could tell it in a personal experience or a case study. And, I mentioned Michelle Obama, but just because some people are like, well, that's Michelle Obama. I also talk about Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift was at an award ceremony a few years ago where she talked about the haters. And she was so crystal clear about telling people to avoid the haters, which will enable you to progress cleanly to your goals and your passions. And it was just such a clean demonstration of point making that I also included it in my book, to make the point that everybody, all of us can be point makers. Nobody is born with these skills. Effective communication is a skill. It is not a talent. So that means that everybody can be a point maker. And the truth is, when you or someone in your audience is about to give a presentation, Michelle Obama cannot give that presentation because she doesn't know what you know. She didn't go through what you went through to become an expert, and she didn't practice like you practiced. So you are the only person in the world who can give that presentation effectively. Know that, and that can give you confidence.
I think the other person you mentioned was Demi Moore, and one of her her thing. Yeah, I think you said you called it a love letter on LinkedIn to her speech.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it so well because she talked about how early in her career she was being typecast, and she was only getting roles where she played sort of the ditzy girlfriend or the peripheral character, or basically the girlfriend, the quote unquote. And she waited and waited, and she was really driving to get a role that mattered to her. And it wasn't the substance. Now, I'm a fan of horror films, so I saw the substance immediately. And she didn't get the Academy Award. She was nominated. I think she earned a Golden Globe and a BAFTA award. But in her speech, she talked about how her drive to believe in her own potential, even when agents and other people were telling her she can't do that. And through that demonstration, through that point she was making, it was memorable, not just to me, but a lot of people who wrote about that as one of the highlights of the event.
Yeah, I'd never heard the term popcorn actress before, so I had to go
Right,
look that one up. What is a popcorn actress? But
we always learn something new.
We do, no matter how old we get. One of the things I like about the book is you talk about making your point in many different vehicles, and so you have kind of some good direction on when we should use email versus chat, which I'm really interested in your thoughts on for the audience, because for me, I'm clearly a conversation guy because that's the name of the podcast, but I feel like human beings have this burning desire to want to check things off of their to-do list, and the best way that I can do that is email you or text you or post something on Slack, and I hope I never hear from you again because then it's done off my plate. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on when we should use email versus chat or some other form.
Yeah, let me give you a personal example. I was writing a keynote speech with a team, and I wouldn't call it a disagreement, but we were trying to get on the same page about the fact that this big keynote speech needed a point. It couldn't be just addressing the history of this topic. or just, they would keep hitting me with a theme or an idea. And I would keep saying, well, what does the CEO want to say about that idea? What does he want to propose, not just share stuff? But we were going at it on a chat, on a professional chat page. It's sort of like Skype or like Slack. And we're going back and forth. And there was a third person in the room. And they said, you know what? I don't think this is the vehicle, because you're both writing 5-word sentences. You're going back and forth. And she was right. And we had to move that to a Zoom meeting so we can give these full-throated explanations and not have to rely on our fingers in this short form. So in the book, I break down about a meeting is about big ideas and sharing it and trying to inform other people. Chats and Slacks, I believe, are really just about quick updates, something you need to say quickly, or if it's extremely urgent. An email is a one-sided communication. So if you're saying, I need to inform you about something, but it's not a back and forth yet, but maybe the next step is, I just need you to review something, or I need to share my experience at a conference or in a previous conversation. This is where I'm sort of going to download it to you in a very, strategic way. I do a lot of email coaching as well. But that's the opportunity there. So realize email is not a back and forth. If you need instant answers, if you need a back and forth, do something like that. If it's involved and you need more time, schedule a Zoom meeting. And if it's a quickie, I just need a yes or no. How do we move forward? I need your attention right now. That's when you get into the chats and Slacks.
Yeah, I think asynchronous communication is great for yes/no answers, or answers to yes/no questions, and or saying, "Hey, here's a summary of what we just talked about." That's great. But if I had this even happen within my own group, where I saw 2 of my team members emailing back and forth, and I finally said, "Stop! You all need to get on the call and solve this. You're spending way too much bandwidth, and you don't understand the context, and you're misreading what they're saying because you're having a bad day. You pick up the phone and let's have a call and talk this out."
Yeah, and you're loading up the inboxes. And, if there's one thing in my email training that's more important than anything else, it's about the subject line. Because I see too many Thursday. And that was 6 Thursdays ago. And someone's got a big idea in there. And like, wait, I woke up with this breakthrough idea. I'm going to send it to the team. And the subject line is rethink. I actually, in the training, I have people break out their phones and look into their sent mail. And after I train them, I say, tell me the ones that you're really not proud of now. And they share them. They're like, the idea, timing, and this is critical. And this is the one big thing I think people take away more than anything else, because when you wake up in the morning and look at your inbox, you're not seeing the emails. You're just seeing the subject lines, and you're making big time decisions. Do I read this now? Do I archive it? Or do I delete it? Because that thread is not important to me anymore. And if you make the wrong decision, that could create a serious, serious delay in process.
You're seeing the title of the book, but not the blurb on the back.
Right, exactly.
You even have some communication style or some suggestions for PowerPoint, which I found interesting, because I guess there's a couple of different thoughts on how you should fill the page or not fill the page.
Yeah, and let me leave you with one thought, because, well, 2 thoughts really. I mean, some people say death by PowerPoint, and they say it's gone, it's antiquated. I don't believe that. For one reason, I'm a visual learner, Clint. I need to see it. And when I see it and hear it at the same time, it will stick. But if I just hear it, frankly, I'm not as good an audio or audible learner. I'm not going to get it as cleanly. All right. So now I need slides. I need visuals. And some people say the 5x5 or 6x6 rule, 5 bullets, 5 words each, or 6 bullets, 6 words each. You can Google or AI, all that. So I'm going to leave you with the one biggest thing I find over and over. Even in a client I have right now, a CEO client who's about to give a major presentation, and that is the title space of the slides. That is the most powerful real estate on a slide, where you have the title and then the images and the bullets go below that. But what do I see? The
title just says data.
Yeah, it says data, beliefs, background, history, data points, the message, goals, learnings, it's like the Dewey Decimal System. They're just sort of putting a label on the content. If someone's checking their email for a moment and not paying attention, they come back, they are lost if it just says data or challenges. So what you want to do is put the point there. There is a brilliant guy, a professor named Michael Alley. He writes a lot about what he calls the assertion evidence principle of slide telling, especially for scientists. In the title goes an assertion in the format of a headline. In the bottom is evidence for that assertion. And I just love the simplicity of that. But in terms of the points, think in terms of the one big takeaway you want people to hear. So let's break that down. You don't want to say data. You don't want to say recommendations. You want to say 20% of professionals believe X over Y. You want to say data shows movement toward this, or recommendation. Think full, not binary. Think multiplicity, not binary. Whatever it is, pretend like nothing else is on the slide but that title. And you want people to get the key message. Now, every slide should have one big message. If it's not, you're trying to compound too many ideas in a single slide. So once we solve that problem, put that idea in the title space. So people are like, aha, I get the point of this slide. Now I'm going to sit back and let you prove it to me.
Right. And that's a challenge, I think, for someone like me who, when I give presentations, it might be 2 or 3 hours for some topics. And if I'm using PowerPoint, which is my least favorite medium, but because it is static, and you're balancing that with them. They're going to get the slides later, so I probably need to put as much information on here as I can because they won't have to take notes. And there's a philosophy of just put a picture and then you talk about, talk around it. So it was really helpful to some of the stuff you suggested.
Mm-hmm. Good. And I often tell people to take one slide and to turn it into 3 slides because they have 3 ideas. We've seen it before. I'm going to talk about internal, external, and around the world. And you see the world picture and the internal picture. But when they present that, they're talking about internal. And I'm like, I'm sort of curious in that world thing. I'm going to take a look at that while you're talking about internal, that third thing that you're going to get to 2 points from now. So what I say is, make that 3 slides so we're focused on each at a time. And they say, yeah, but Joel, that will triple my time. No, it won't, because you're still dealing with them one at a time. You're just clicking. In fact, you could even do it in animation so it doesn't look like you're going to different slides.
Yeah.
So it's important to know, back to that principle of one idea at a time, even in email, and definitely on a slide. And what that helps you with is when you do need to cut. And by the way, if you have more slides than time and you're running out of time, always cut, never speed up. Because anything you speed up, they're not going to digest. You could always share that later in a follow-up communication. So when you break it up like that, 1 point per slide, it actually helps you understand what's more important than something else. And once you understand that, then you can decide where to cut.
Yeah, I'm somebody who's famous for in my presentations, I have more, I put more in than I know that I can cover because I'm going to give it to them anyway. But now, having read the book, I'm going to make sure at the end I say, here's the key point I want you to take away.
Right.
Just to make sure that they have that and they can go through all the gory details as they want to.
Yeah. And it's this theme I mentioned before, the beginning and the end. It's actually a research thing called primacy and recency. Primacy is the very start, and that is sticky because it's not being compared or competing with anything else. That's where you get at the beginning. That's why you don't want to delay your point. It's not like a movie where you're going to spoil the ending. I'm going to show you why, if we do X, Y will result. And at the end, it's called recency. People will remember it more because it's the most recent thing they heard. Now, some people blow it by saying, this will save lives. Now I'd like to bring up a new speaker. Or this will save lives. And now I'm ready for Q&A. Something that's a lot less important, but I'm going to bury my point, my final moment of recency, and run right into Q&A because I don't understand that a pause will help people digest that final point, apply it, understand its relevance, maybe write it down, perhaps tweet it. They need time to do all of that stuff in their head. That's why you need to pause at the very end.
Yeah, I think that was another important takeaway for me because even though I was born and raised in the South, mom and dad did not pass down the slow talking gene. So I tend to talk fast, and you make a point of that in the book. You say that if you talk fast, you're probably not going to be able to slow down. So don't bother, but at least put some purposeful pauses in so you give people a chance to catch up, because they're filtering it through everything. They're trying to hear what you're saying. And if you go to the next topic, they're still stuck 3 topics back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you need to build in that time. So 2 things I recommend for fast speakers, because I'm naturally one as well. And I'm going to blame it on New York City and the Northeast. But the one thing is what you mentioned, embrace pauses, because that'll bring your speedometer down to 0, maybe up again. But at least it creates these breaks that will help you. And like you said, help your audience, give them cognitive time to realize it. The other trick, and this one is almost a hack, raise your volume. If you raise, you have a limited amount of breath in your lungs.
Yeah.
If you raise your volume, that takes a lot of breath. So I find it nearly impossible to speak loudly and quickly at the same time, because I just don't have enough breath to do both simultaneously. So that's a good trick for people who speak too quickly. Try going louder, and it'll be impossible to maintain that rate.
Yeah, I speak pretty loud anyway, but I'm going to try that, because I remember early in my career, I was teaching a class over in Prague in the Czech Republic, and it was a 2-day class, and I got to lunch on the first day, and I said, "How are we doing?" And it was dead silence. And I said, "Are you guys okay?" It was dead silence. I said, "Does anybody understand anything that I'm saying?" Dead silence. Finally, a guy on the front row said, "Perhaps you could speak a little slower." So
Right.
I try to remind people, and I tell people, listen, if I start talking too fast, tell me. Writing on the evaluation form at the end of class that Clint talks too fast is not helpful. It's too late.
Yeah.
You got to tell me in the session. But I think the pauses will be something that can help me.
Yeah. And the reason I think about it every day, because how often does someone leave us a message on the phone where they say, "Hey, this is Sharon Johnson. Just call me back at 255-321." It's like, what could be more important? They could even say, "Oh, this is really urgent. It's about your dad. Just call me back at this is Clarence Johnson, 422." And I'm like, how could you possibly think that that's appropriate when you want me to call you back on something that's urgent? But it illustrates like how we just don't think about that kind of priorities in communication.
Yeah, I try on this. It's quick aside. I try on those calls to make sure I say my number at the beginning and say it at the end as well, because they started writing it at the beginning and they lost, and now I'll be able to catch up at the end. So
yeah, I say my wife makes fun of me actually, because I always say 1, 2, 1, 2. She laughs at me, but you got to do what you got to do. It's not about the fact that you said it; they have to hear it.
Another thing you said, and you were talking about, you had people pull out their phones and go through their emails looking for the RE. I think you also talked about having people look for some of what you call, I think, the bad adjectives or the badjectives, which is how many look for all the ands and be able to see if you could take out some of them. Talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, let's talk about badjectives, because I see a lot of presentations where this idea is great. This idea is fantastic. This campaign is just going to blow people away. Listen, Clint, I had a tuna fish sandwich yesterday that was great. That was awesome. And it did blow me away because it was just chopped perfectly, had celery and onions, just like I like it. Now, if I'm using the same adjective to describe a tuna fish sandwich that I would for a breakthrough marketing program, that adjective is not doing me a service. And that's a badjective. And badjectives are like great, very good, awesome, blow me away. Even interesting is a badjective, because lots of things are interesting. So I call them badjectives because it's a wasted sentence at the end of the day, because it's just too broad. How do you get rid of them? If you spot them in your speech, in your email, before you send it, in your article, in your blog, in your post, 2 things. One is to ask yourself why. I said something is great. Why is it great? Well, it'll be a huge cost savings for us. All right. So this is great because it'll be a cost savings. Now, why not just eliminate that badjective in the middle? This will create a cost savings. We're removing less is more and more is less. So we ask that question and we eliminate that. The other thing you mentioned, I think, is really important, and I'm about to post something tomorrow about this on LinkedIn. It's called the and audit. If you look for the word and in your emails, in your blogs, in your posts, and in your speeches, it'll often be a place where there are 2 ideas when one will do. Either they are synonyms, the same really in meaning, or one will be so much more important than the other why share them and take the chance that someone will remember the wrong one, the least important one? So look for that word and, look for the competition of 2 points, 2 words, 2 descriptors, whether they're phrases or adjectives, and choose one. Kill that and. We think of and as our friend, our partner in communication. Oh, I can add more words here. But at the end of the day, as we discussed, one word will almost always be better, one descriptor, 1 point at a time, one descriptor at a time. So it's hard to sort of look for those or just cut in places. But if you use the and audit, you'll know the places where you can definitely strike.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier about the Christmas tree effect of the more ornaments I put on, the better, right? And so we're going to save lives and save money. I don't think the money matters when you compare it to lives. So
absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really good. So the badgetives I thought was interesting as well. So going back to your example, you could say, well, I know you said tuna salad, let's say egg salad. The balance of mayonnaise and pickles and egg was perfect on this sandwich, right? Or it's just like I like it on this sandwich. The ratio was great,
Yeah.
So.
And I use that with the fourth graders also. We go around, I say, the shirt is great. And then we have to go around the room and everyone has to replace my adjective of great with something else. The shirt was blue. The shirt was oversized. The shirt was silly. And then that starts them learning about specific telling and moving adjectives versus broad and purposeless adjectives.
So we talked about badgetives and the and audit. What are some of the biggest communication traps you think teams fall into, especially in meetings?
Yeah, meetings are very hard. And what happens is that, first of all, the leaders of those meetings, they bring an agenda, which is what? The table of contents. So what are they missing? They're not bringing points. So when I talk to people who are leading meetings, whether they're actual leaders or it's just their turn to lead a meeting, in addition to the agenda, bring 4 goals or 4 points that you want to make. I want us to have a discussion to solve the problem of X. I want to propose us using this new norm to make our meetings more effective. I want to introduce our new coordinator so everyone understands how best to work with her. Decide 4 or so points and use the XY test and use the I believe that test to make it that meeting. And that will help you keep the meeting going, because point 3 on the agenda is new people. And, you could talk about that forever. I don't believe in icebreakers, I have to tell you. And I wrote a big, I think Inc.com article about this. Icebreakers are problematic because often they serve no purpose. Yeah, what's your favorite book? All right, can we, I got the drivers in the room. If you make them relevant to the discussion, everyone please talk about, your reaction to the campaign that launched last week. Let's go around the room. Now that's relevant. But if it's irrelevant, I don't think it's serving purpose. I don't think it's getting people sort of exercised. And if it's a large group, there will be introverts in the room. They don't need to be put on the spot to somehow be expected to act like extroverts. And it's just the way of the world. We need to be cognizant of different types of learners and different types of participants. And that's, by the way, not to get off topic, but that's one of the reasons that Zoom calls are sometimes better than live in-person meetings, because an introvert may feel more comfortable responding in chat than unmuting or raising their hand in public. But if there's a last thing, if there's one sort of another hack I'd like to recommend for people in meetings to do, it's about rabbit hole detection. And one of the really interesting things that I've seen meetings do is assign a rabbit hole manager for every meeting. And that person's sole job, just like the person who's taking notes and the person who's leading the meeting, that person's sole job is to raise their hand and say, rabbit hole alert. I think we're getting off topic. I think we will not get to the important things on the agenda if we continue down this. I suggest we table it. The beauty of that is nobody's going to think that person is interrupting or taking charge of the meeting when they shouldn't be, because that's their role. And everyone will appreciate it because it keeps the meeting on track. Whenever I've seen it done, I just seen people appreciate it, and it serves a vital function. You get to the end of the agenda, besides that horrible place in the meeting where you're like, well, all right, we didn't get to these 3 things. Let's schedule another meeting. Look at that in your inbox. Yeah, so that's a really great process.
I can see that now. We're going down a rabbit hole. Yeah, but let me go ahead and finish this thought.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what's funny is I do my workshops and I love the Q&A because they'll hit me with scenarios that I may not cover. And one of them often is, hey, I get interrupted at meetings all the time. What can I do about that that's not awkward? Because, you know, if you don't respond to someone who interrupts you, then you've lost your opportunity, and that's just rude, but you don't do anything about it. If you call attention to it in an aggressive way, that creates super awkwardness. Hey, Jim, you interrupted me. That was really uncool. Like, all right, now everyone's going to remember that. So here's the hack. Actually, I read this somewhere and I love sharing it. You want to solve the problem with a compliment. Hey, Jim, thanks for that point. You know, you added something really interesting. I'm going to think about that. I just want to finish what I was saying about, or hey, Sally, I appreciate the feedback and your opinion. I'm going to think about that. I just want to make sure everyone understands what I was saying about. When you lead with that compliment, they feel good. People feel good. You gave them a compliment and you could still finish your point.
Yeah, I like that idea. I'm not as big a fan of the one that go, yes, and like, okay, so you're just, that one I think makes more sense. Do you think clarity and communication improves collaboration and trust?
Absolutely. It definitely it helps with collaboration, because when you have multiple viewpoints, when you have a brainstorm session, if everyone is making points versus just sharing ideas and throwing words out there and probably rambling or bogarting it, don't realize the purpose of what they're communicating, there's a lot of time wasted. So it assists collaboration because you just simply get more voices there. And it's there, especially, I think a rabbit hole manager helps. But I think it's also true for your reputation, for your credibility, for leadership. We want our leaders to be clear because we want to leave leadership communications knowing what to do or what to be inspired by. Leaders who ramble or don't make it clear, or you come away from thinking, I didn't get really anything from that, or I got a bunch of confusion, it's going to hurt that leader's credibility. So being clear has so many benefits other than just the communication of me to you and you understanding that. It affects your reputation. It affects your credibility. It affects collaboration. It affects give and take. And at the end of the day, it affects progress.
Do you have a favorite story that you can use as an example of how a clear point, transformed the team or a project success?
I have an example of a bad situation. So I'm going to lean at that since that struck me first. Not naming names, but I was in a large meeting where a senior executive had to give basically, this is where we are in our progress. I'm going to give you a status report, and I'm going to tell you what are the projects we're working on. So we're all sitting there, and he gets up, and he has some notes. I think he had communication consultants, but he held them, and then I think he put them in his pocket. And he rambled like you would not believe. I think he was supposed to go 10 minutes. I think he went 25 minutes. There was no structure to it. It was just, what I call a fire hose versus a laser beam. And I'll tell you the truth, Clint, we were angry. We were angry because we had things to do. We wanted to get direction. And to me, that leader's credibility never recovered from that moment. So that's what's on the line if you don't communicate with clarity. The good example, and I really have to go back to what you were saying about project management with a capital P and a capital M. That meeting, that first meeting you have in project management, if you have a charter document, if you've identified the stakeholders, if you've talked about the why, those meetings have been some of the best, the shortest, and the most efficient that I've been on, because those were meetings with purpose and acting on purpose versus meetings where purpose was not identified. You only had an agenda, and you come away from them thinking time is wasted. I would say one other thing. My wife is a school teacher, and she goes to meetings where the purpose of the meeting is to discuss how they want to address children who have conflict and who have challenges. Nothing could be more important than them getting all on the same page about how to address that student's challenge. But the meetings are so bloated in the beginning with discussion of this latest thing and that new approach and this party and that big offsite they're going to have. They do not get to the discussion of students. And then they go and they meet with those students without the means of addressing the situation, at least consistently. When I hear that, I just can't think of anything more perilous or more destructive in a meeting. Because often we think of it, that meeting wasn't great, but whatever, that's the way meetings go. No, it can be extremely destructive if the meetings don't meet their purposes.
I'm a huge, huge fan of face-to-face and being in the room together and all that. But I will say that the situation you described with the CEO or the leader getting up and, pontificating for 30 minutes, that's the advantage of Teams, right? Because you can just put in the chat, hey, sorry, I got to go, and you're out. As opposed to getting up, collecting your stuff in the room, look while he's looking at you and walking out. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a fan of both. Sometimes, there are things you can do in Zoom you can't do in the room, and the things you can do in the room that you can't do in Zoom. So I treat them both similar ways. And I do a lot of training on how to use this space, this box, to make sure your presence, some people are way back here, or their face is sort of cut off, or all these things that sort of subtract from their presence. They're not being loud anymore. They're sort of using a volume like this because they think the microphone is capturing their information. So they lose a lot of their presence and a lot of their executive presence because they're not using volume. So I really want people to know to take advantage of all the opportunities that virtual meetings have, and not just think of it as the little brother and the option B to an actual meeting.
I always, my favorite ones are the ones who like they're in the witness protection program. There's no light. And so you can't see them. Like, are you there? I think I kind of see a shadow.
Yeah.
Put a light on, man. Come on.
I will tell you the most controversial thing I coach about Zoom and Teams meetings, and that is the blur screen. A lot of people like the blur background, but I do not encourage it for two reasons. One is that it creates this sort of weird outline around you that just says, authenticity and artificiality. And these days, AI. And, what's that term when it's a phony, a deep
fake.
Yeah, deep fake. The other reason is, and I'm glad to see you have a real background. I think that's a real background.
It is. It's real.
This is supposed to mimic a live conversation.
Yeah.
This is supposed to have the benefit of two people talking person to person. If I lose this background and make it blur, I am taking away from that dynamic of a live situation by inserting something artificial. I do think it is stealing some of the humanness of a conversation when I have a completely blur background, the same as it would be if it was the Star Trek Enterprise or, a football stadium. So I discourage it, and I want to just get this out there because not everyone recognizes that. They think, all right, well, it's a little messy back there. I could clean it up. I'll just put out a blur screen.
I think there's two, before we leave this topic, there's like a pro and a con for me with the Zoom, virtual stuff. One, the pro is that you talked about introverts before. If I take that a different place, if you're in a room face to face and your coworker's 6'7" and you're 4'11", that feels oppressive, right? But on Zoom, everybody square is the same size. So that kind of evens that out, which I think is a positive. The negative with virtual calls is, there's been some research that's done when you and I are in a room together making eye contact. There are chemical reactions that happen. We actually form an emotional bond. And it just doesn't. I was interviewing Sherry Turkle from MIT about this, and she had written a book called Empathy Diaries, and we were talking about it. And she says, Clint, to make you think I'm looking at you, to make you trick in this, I'm looking in the camera, but actually I can't see you at all. You're way down here. And so so I think there's, to your point, there's trade-offs. There are times when it's good, times when it's bad. And then the advice that I have for people who do virtual or hybrid is don't forget the people on the call. I mean, we've all been there where you're the person on the call and the people in the room do all the talking. In the very end, oh, Bob's on the phone. And Bob, what do you think? And Bob's like, well, all the good ideas are gone because you didn't ask me. So, start with the people on the call first sometimes just to give them a shot.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. They don't want to be left out. And you raise a very good point about, this is me looking at you.
Yeah.
This is me actually looking at you.
Exactly.
And if you make points, I say this in the book, the stronger your eye contact is and the few things between you and that person, which is why live is a stronger connection than virtual. But this is not good at all. No. A lot of people are over here. If I had a rule of thumb to share with people, it would be if you are moving your head or your neck to move back and forth between the camera, it's too far away. Yeah. You need to bring them closer together. And in my training, I talk about how you want to put notes, even on stickies, right? Or even your PowerPoint, whatever, right below the camera. So at least you're close to the camera if this is the goal. The further you move away from it, you are just subtracting from that human connection.
And it is disconcerting when you first start off to look in the camera and, because I want to see you, but I'm looking in the camera instead. And it's you get used to it. You just recognizing you're not going to see the person, but I see you off in the periphery, but I'm trying to mimic that connection.
Yeah, it's a black dot. I mean, people who do a lot of appearing on the news a lot, they're used to it.
Yeah.
Because it's similar to when you're in another location, you look into a camera, you don't see anything there and you're pretending that you're talking to the host. But yeah, the more you do of it, the more you will get used to it. Now, our screen here for this podcast, I moved it up as close as I can to the camera so that I can just move my eyes between what I'm looking at and the camera. Like I said, not my head or neck.
Well, for these podcast, industry secret, I actually have a teleprompter. So I am actually looking at you while you're seeing me. So I am trying to model that as much as I possibly can. So
that helps. I've tried different things. I know there's one you can hang on the screen, but I don't like having everything else blocked by that hanging thing. So the technology is definitely going to get better.
Oh, for sure. I want to talk about storytelling because this is something I love. I love stories. I love to tell stories. But you say that you got to make sure they fit and don't distract from your point.
Right. One of the more controversial things I say is that the most important part of your story in a presentation is not the story. It's the part where you transform the story from riveting to relevant, and you do that with words at the end of the story. So I contend that the most important part of your story is where you say, this story illustrates why we should. This case study proves why we must. This event really shows what happens when we apply. And that's where you take the story and make it relevant. If you watch TED Talks, especially Simon Sinek in particular, you will see that they and he almost always end the story, which is always a strategic story that is meant to illustrate the point with the very words, this story illustrates why we must. Now, some people come to me and say, well, if it's a well-told story, do you really need that? And I say, well, when you show a piece of data, do you not need to say this data illustrates that? You can't have it both ways.
Right.
A story is like data. It's still a representation of a point that is not explicit until you make it so. So that's all I really do. Yes, choose stories that illustrate your point. Don't just tell stories to entertain. You can tell a story to introduce a point, but the best stories really illustrate the point you're trying to make because the story is a vehicle through which your point travels. And that's why you need a point. If my point is just podcasting, then a lot of stories could be that vehicle. But if my point is podcasting is our best way to reach this particular key audience, then my world of stories is limited. But I choose one that illustrates my exact point.
Do you find that there's a ratio? I'm a math guy, so I like ratios. But is there a ratio of what's the right balance between data and logic and emotion when you're trying to be persuasive in communication?
Yeah, well, I really believe in the Aristotle and the ethos and the logos and the pathos, the pathos. And that's really how I'd love to divide it up. And I would say 30, 30, 30 in terms of those categories. Of course, pathos is an emotional pitch, an argument. You're telling a story that's making people cry or feel. Logos is the logical thing. Maybe that's data. Maybe that's math, or you're just saying things that are reasonable. And ethos, some people think that's about and about you making an ethical argument. It's not. It's about credibility. And sometimes you already have the credibility because of your bio or you've established your reputation. But I would mix it up that way. What I would say to answer your question is don't think of it like math. Like I need to have certain of this, certain of this, certain of this. Just think of it in terms of efficiency. These stories are both great. Do I need all three stories? Can I just tell this with the one story? When I tell that story, do they really need to know that her first job was being a circus clown? Does that detail service the point I'm making? Because remember, the story is in service to your point. Anything about the story that's not in service to your point doesn't help. If there's a really funny aspect, you can say it. But as I say, with all humor and all jokes, it is a fleeting moment of entertainment. It is not really a moment that's serving you in any particular way. So think of it that way and think of it in terms of your efficiency in saying that. The only thing I would say is something I learned from another consultancy that the president of which I spoke to not too long ago. He talked a lot about break the pattern. You know, when we hear something over and over and over and over and over again, we will become so used to it that we begin to tune it out. Like if I said, here's an experiment between you and I. Listen to this. 1111112 1111112 1111112. If I asked you how many twos there were, chances are you'd be able to tell me there were 3 twos. If I asked you to tell me how many ones there were, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me. That's because we got used to the sound of the ones. Similarly, in presentations, if it's PowerPoint, picture, bullets, picture, bullets, picture, bullets, people are going to begin to get a little too used to that and not be fascinated anymore. So you want to break the pattern. At some points, show a video, show a data point or a chart, show a picture, illustration, or tell a story. Stories are probably the biggest way to sort of break the pattern. So look for places in your presentation, especially if it's long, 2 or 3 hours, 2 hours. I would say every 15 minutes or so, try to break it up. Even if it's just a question to your audience. I'm going to stop here and ask a question. Raise your hand if these little things, there are many ways to do it, and just stick them in there just for the strategic purpose to break up the pattern of the experience for your audience.
And then it also makes sense because there's studies have shown that the brain is basically lazy or efficient. You pick the right words you like, but it's always trying to find patterns. And then once it's found, it's like, okay, I got this. Now I can tune out. Whereas what you're doing is you're constantly changing the pattern. So the brain has to stay engaged.
Yeah. Think about, the washing machine. After a while, you tune it out, or the music in the background or anything like that. Think of how we tune out certain noises when we're focused on something. Well, in the case of a presentation, the part you're tuning out may be the part you need to struggle harder to pay attention to. So it sounds like there are 100,000 things on the plate for a presenter to be mindful of. And what I always say at the end of my workshops is focus on the 2 or 3 that can make a difference right now. And then once you got those down, maybe think of some of the others, triage them. So what, if the big thing is you're rambling, if the big thing is your voice is too soft, and being louder can make a big difference because volume increases your authenticity and your credibility and your competency, then be louder. Use pauses. Pick the 2 or 3 things at first. So you're not overwhelmed with trying to be a perfect public speaker, which should be on nobody's to-do list. And I say this to my 4th graders also. It is never a pursuit of perfection. There's a reason why we don't say you perform a speech. What do we say? You deliver a speech. If you're performing it, you think about it in terms of perfection. Oh, it's about my face and which shirt I wore and not bobbling over words. If you know it's about delivery, you can deliver something imperfectly, but as long as you make the delivery, like a bicycle delivery person in New York City, you succeed. So if they remember your point, but don't remember you, that's fine because your job was to deliver the point. But if they remember you, oh, how was Clint's presentation? Oh man, I love Clint. He's so funny. He's really interesting. That guy is so smart. What did you learn from his session? I don't really remember. I'll have to look back at my notes or my AI notes, but man, I'd love to hear him again. That's unfortunately a fail because you're not interested in that unless you want to get more public speaking gigs.
That's not a bad thing, right? So
some of us feel like, well, I can go for that.
Is there a way when I'm delivering something, how can I tell if my message is not getting across or if my message has lost its impact?
First, don't rely on your head. A lot of people get nervous or they think it's not going well because there's a voice in their head saying, yo, this is going south. You're boring them. Look at those eyes. They're not getting it. They're confused. Recognize that voice is the voice of your insecurity. It wants you to be more insecure. It is your fight or flight instinct telling you to fly because this is producing too much anxiety. It is giving you bad intel. And it is often lying to you about what's really going on because it wants you to run. It wants you to be so overwhelmed that you just don't do it anymore because it's not smart. So what you have to do is really forget about the voice in your head. Instead, go back to what I've been saying about delivery. How does an Amazon person who's making deliveries know that the order was received? They take a picture of it on your porch. Similarly, the only way to know if you delivered your point is to go to someone in your audience as you practice and say, what was your big takeaway? What do you think was the biggest point I was trying to make? Or if they need a little help, I wanted people to take away this idea and this idea, or this one idea. Did you receive that? That's why the right kind of strategic and purposeful practice is important. If you're helping me, Clint, and I'm practicing in front of you and I say to you, so Clint, how was that? And you said, oh, that was pretty good. That doesn't help me at all. But if I say to you, Clint, what did you take away from that? What one thing did you take away? That's the ball game right there. So to answer to your question is, in your practice, find someone who can respond and tell you. Or at the very least, if you do a survey after presentations in your companies, don't just ask them to give them a 1 to 5 rating. Ask, which of these points do you think the CEO was trying to make? Or in this box, put the point, the takeaway you received from that communication. That is the gold mine right there. And that's what I ask when we used to go with my CEO to conferences, and then I would go into the place where all of the people were selling their goods, the vendors, and they saw a speech, or I run into people saying a speech, and I never said, hey, how do you think he did? I say, what point do you think he was trying to make? And then I judged the entire presentation based on their answers to that question.
That's interesting. Hopefully it was they got the point more often than not.
More often than not, they did.
What's the most powerful aha moment you've witnessed, from your clients applying your techniques?
I think not to be repetitive, but it's worth repeating. The biggest aha moment is when they transform their idea of how they make their workplace more safe for employees. If I'm dealing with an organization that does construction or builds buildings, and they go from we work very quickly and very effectively. That's what they think their point is. And they transform that to, based on our work, we make these offices safer for all employees and reduce workplace accidents. There's a huge difference between those two things, and they realize it immediately. And I always ask the other people in the room, which do you think was stronger and why? That is the single biggest aha movement when they go from a topic or a theme or a description of inventory to a strong point. Because only with points can you move people to do 3 things. And I stole this from another consultant that I work with because I thought I loved it. If you nail it, if you nail your presentation, you will have impact. But let's define impact. You will make people feel, think, or do something new. One of those three things, that's what will happen if you do it right. And that's the measuring stick. And if someone hears that this vendor is going to reduce the number of workplace accidents where I work, hey, man, that's what I'm interested in doing, not just hiring a great vendor.
So you may have answered this question, but if you could give one communication tip to everybody listening today, what would it be?
In media training, just to go off for a moment, you train someone at the end of the interview when they say the same thing you just asked what's one thing you want to leave your audience knowing? And the wrong answer in media training is, all right, well, I said all this. What's the 12th most important thing I have to say so I can insert it here? They don't realize that it's an opportunity to reinforce the big moment. So I would whether you're sharing an idea at a meeting, at a conference, in an email, in a Slack, or in a face-to-face, whether it's happening at a conference to your boss or it's happening in a phone call with your mother-in-law, always take a moment to use the test, like the I believe that test, to transform your share of words into a point that you sell. Not everyone likes the message that everyone's in sales, especially some of the people I talk to who are in editorial, but it's the truth, man. Everybody is in sales, and an idea is just as important as a product, which means you need to sell it, not just share it.
And I think that I don't want people to take away from you mentioned teaching this to third and fourth graders. The tests that you have, like the I believe that test and the XY test, they are quite simple, but just because something is simple doesn't mean it can't be impactful or powerful. And these really are. They're really helpful for me.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And that's my goal. When I wrote the book, I always write in nuts and bolts. And I never say, well, just stop doing that. I think everyone needs kind of a Nicorette approach. What thing can you apply so that you could stop doing this or that you can do that? And that's what the book is all about. Here, try this, take this advice. Think of it like this and not that. And you'll be an executive. And the language of leadership is really just about taking everything from get to the point and applying it specifically to the realm of leadership.
Yeah, and for me, it's about applying it in my teams to make sure that people are getting the point. So as a wrap up, I'm going to ask you 3 questions I always ask everybody who comes on. They're quick hitters. Right. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
The probably biggest one is that it's not about what I say, it's about what they hear. And I apply that all the time, and I think about it all the time because it's so easy to make that mistake. It feels like gravity. What am I going to write today? And not what is my readership? What is my audience? What are my listeners? What do they most want and need from me in this moment? And that's been the most transformative in my own work.
I think that any of us who have ever been in long-term relationships have probably hit a rough patch. And that's what you'll say, that's not what I said. But that's not what I heard. Right?
Right. Exactly. It doesn't matter what you said.
You said, pick up that t-shirt. What I heard was I'm a slob and lazy and blah, blah, blah. Right. So what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given, I'm going to put it in a job search situation. The best advice I've ever been given is when you have to choose between different job officers, to base it on your boss and to understand that's the person you're going to be working closest with. And that's the person you're going to be being led by. And that's the role model you're going to be using. So that advice just comes top of mind to me because often when I'm training people and training groups, I really get a strong sense of their culture. I get a sense of the role models in those groups. And, where it really applies, now that I think of it, is about being a role model. If I can train 10 people in an organization to use some of these tips and to share them because they are so simple, I can get 50 or 60 people doing them if I just teach them to teach, if I teach the teachers and then they teach those people how to fish instead of giving them the fish.
That's awesome. What's the last question? What's the best book or article you read recently? And what was the key takeaway?
The best article I read recently is probably, what is it? It was an article. Well, there was an article that if you pull your ears, you will become more relaxed. But I just find articles on LinkedIn all the time, and I save them about how to focus your thoughts on key issues. And I think the one I read recently was about selling your ideas with specificity and not even just putting them out there, and use selling language. And the most specific thing was about pain points, the importance of identifying pain points in your audience and in your partners and in your vendors, and being specific about those. What I was doing in my own marketing was talking about solutions, and then talking very generally about how the solutions affect their problems. But I changed that around. And instead now I often start with pain points, about rambling, about ineffective communication, about poorly led meetings. And then I bring in the solutions that I have for that, because I'm not relating to them with my solutions. I'm relating to them with the pain points. And that's how I make the communication. The sales part is how I leverage that connection.
It's funny when you said that, because I remember there's somebody I know that's in the Speaker Hall of Fame, and I was talking with them, and they said, she said, I subscribe to the slap, slap, hug, hug approach. Basically, I give you the bad news up front, then I give you a big hug, and it's going to be okay. Here's what we're going to solve it.
I love it. I don't think we could do that in person. These days, you never know. Ask for permission for the hug. I think, are you a hugger? And then you're okay.
Well, Joel, this has really been great. If people want to learn more about you, engage with you, how can they do that?
They can go to www.joelschwartzberg.net. That's JoelSchwartzberg.net. The IT people like when I say this. I consider my work open code. I don't think I'm competing with other coaches in this way. So if you go to my website, everything I've written for Harvard Business Review or Fast Company or Toastmaster Magazine is all there. It's all linked, and it's linked with the titles that identify specific skills. So I love to send people there to look up what they might have a hang up about and to get some information there. All of my podcasts are there. All the information about my books are there. And you can contact me there. So I would just send people there to get instant advice on how best to become the best champion of their points. And Clint, if there's one word I really want people to sort of embrace in terms of their point making, is champions. You want to be a champion of your point, not just a sharer or a submitter of those points.
That's awesome. Really appreciate your time today, Joel. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Clint, and thanks to your audience.